Right. Well, let me, before we get into a little bit more substantive stuff, let me ask one more political question. So the president
As opposed to the trivia we've been talking about?
All trivial stuff, yes. Well, wait till you see what I ask you next, actually. The president is going to have to run for re-election any day now. I mean, you know these election cycles are they're just really long. You are someone who challenged not the incumbent, but effectively the incumbent in Al Gore in 2000.
Yeah.
There's now talk openly about the possibility of a challenge to the president. Would you, as a good Democrat and as somebody who observes this process, support that in any way? Would you see any reason for that?
Absolutely not. Yeah. I think it's ludicrous to talk about that now.
Yeah.
If you look comparatively, Obama's numbers are better than Ronald Reagan's in 1982. You didn't hear anybody in 1982 saying, well, we're going to challenge the president. The amazing thing is a lot of these pundits on TV, not you, but
no, of course not.
others that make more money than you.
or money.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, they'll say, this is what the situation is today, right? And this is what we should do. Okay. Then they're absolutely wrong, right? Absolutely wrong. 2 weeks later, we think you should do that, the opposite thing. Nobody holds them accountable because they're just show business. They're entertaining.
Right.
And then you find some of these people who say, when they're pressed for their venom or their anger or whatever, they say, well, we're just entertainers.
You're not speaking of anybody in particular.
I'm thinking of a few people.
I bet you probably are. I want to ask you about something that I thought was very interesting. I seemed to stop reading Esquire magazine at exactly the wrong moment. And I stopped reading Esquire magazine about 6 months ago. And then come to find that you participated in a project that Esquire hatched this fall. It was you and 3 former senators. John Danforth from Missouri, Republican. Bob Packwood from Oregon, Republican. Gary Hart from Colorado, Democrat. And what you all did was basically say, we're going to try to, liberated from the consequences of having to ever seek elective office again, balance the federal budget. And we're going to pronounce all these things as things we ought to do, but you know, clearly politically some of them are going to be hard, but since we have no reason to seek office again, we can just say what's on our minds. I want to ask you about a couple of those because they were really fascinating. One was what is traditionally thought to be a third rail of politics, raise the retirement age to 70.
Yeah, well,
you're for this.
Let me give you some context.
Yeah.
So we were asked to sit in a room for 3 or 4 days, as if we were senators, we were once, and try to figure out what could we agree on to balance the budget by 2020, reduce the federal debt to 60% of GDP.
Right. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans.
2 Democrats, 2 Republicans.
Right.
So, you know, the process itself was fun.
Yeah.
I was there for a day and a half, and I realized, hey, I really like doing this when I was in the Senate.
Remember this.
I remember this.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, what do we need to do? If you're going to balance the budget by 2020, you got to deal with the big issues. And the big issues are Social Security, Medicare, defense, and taxes.
Right.
You're not going to get where you need to get in 2012 balancing the budget by reducing the parks by 1%, right? And so we decided we would tackle the big issues. And on Social Security, we gradually raised the retirement age to 70 in 2056. And then for those workers who have manual labor jobs, we established a special disability fund that they could use and they could have access to between 67 and 70. We changed the way the cost of living index was established, which reflected more reality. So they did those 2 things. On defense, we cut defense about $140 billion.
Right.
By devising a defense budget to fit the threats of today, not the threats of yesterday.
None of the legacy stuff that we all protect.
We're not in a Cold War anymore. We're not trying to build a military in order to stop the Russians from coming across the North German plain. We're dealing with the Al-Qaedas of the world. We're dealing with regional threats. And we're dealing with defense requirements that are really related to intelligence, mobility, control of the seas.
And reduce farm subsidies or reform farm subsidies or something on there?
Farm subsidies. I mean, just really a shocking thing. We said if the farmer makes more than $500,000 a year, he
maybe doesn't need any
subsidies. And then on taxes.
Well, you also, before you get to taxes, you also said get rid of all earmarks.
Well, yeah, right? Get rid of all, but you don't save much money. That was kind of symbolic.
But that might be the most controversial thing of all.
Maybe to people in Washington, but it won't be controversial to people.
We just elected a whole bunch of people who campaigned on no earmarks and then weren't even sworn in yet, and we're like, well, I was kidding about that.
Yeah, that really builds trust in the people.
Doesn't it actually? Yeah, it's why we're cynical about all this. And then on taxes, you talked about, among other things, I thought was fascinating and really interesting, especially right now, raise the gasoline tax by $1.
Yeah, we did a couple of things. One thing is we trimmed some of the loopholes. The big tax item, though, was we increased the gasoline tax 10 cents a year over the next 10 years till 2020, right? And people say, oh, $1 gasoline tax, but stay with me on that. At the same time, we required the automobile companies to double their mileage, to get to 46 miles a gallon as opposed to 24 miles a gallon. So if you did those two things simultaneously,
yep,
the average person would be spending no more for their gasoline in 2020 than they're now spending.
Right.
Because they'd have much more fuel-efficient cars. So, you know, the point is the media and our politics today allow you to hear one thing, but it makes it very difficult for you to connect two or three things.
Right.
But life is always a connection of two or three things. It's not one thing. And this example, if you connect the tax with the change in the fuel efficiency, you get a good outcome.
But most people would say, well, Bill Bradley is for higher taxes.
No, it was Jack Danforth.
I'm sorry, Jack Packwood. That Snake Packwood is for higher taxes. He's from Oregon. They're
those
communists.
Republicans,
Right?
those Republicans were asking for higher taxes.
It's crazy.